So we'll be talking about how to engage your developers to develop some cloud-native applications using a hackathon. So my name is Marc Nozell. I work for Hewlett-Packard. I'm part of the Helion technical ambassador team. I travel around and talk to a lot of new customers who are adopting our technologies.
I'm Devon Bleak. I'm an Associate Director of Cloud with Fox Entertainment Group and reporting into our architecture strategy.
So we've worked together. A couple months ago, we had a hackathon down in Los Angeles, brought a bunch of the Fox developers and held a hackathon down there. What we'd like to answer today is, sort of what is a hackathon? Is it for you and for your business? How to approach it, and how to make it successful and keep the momentum going. So first thing of all, what's a hackathon, right? It has nothing to do with security, right? Some people say, oh, it's a hack. This is a bad thing.
It's a branding problem.
It's a branding, setting expectations for some of the folks. So a hackathon is typically a 2 or 3 day engagement. You bring a bunch of developers together, put them in a room, give them a little bit of training, and have them develop a new application. So typically this is around some new technology. In our case, it was around the Helion development platform, which is based on Cloud Foundry, having folks develop a cloud-native application. The event typically also includes a little bit of training. In our case, we had about a half day or so worth of training about what the platform looked like, how the developers can access it, and the sort of enough to get them going. And then after that, it was pretty much 2 full days of developers just sitting, developing code, and having assistance. The typical way this is supported is you have a number of staffers who are running the hackathon who will walk around, talk with the developers, see if there's any issues, remove any issues, and get them going. Also a little bit of training as they need it. That's pretty much it. So Devon.
So our challenge was around kind of getting the various development groups on board with cloud native patterns. Running kind of cloud for the organization. I would get a lot of, hey, I need a server in the cloud. I'm just like, ooh, you're gonna do it wrong, aren't you? And trying to get them on board with more of owning the operations of their application. We came up with the idea of a hackathon to kind of get them exposed to cloud-native design patterns, platform as a service, as well as a little bit of DevOps. So most of our groups were still stuck in the kind of traditional approach of a monolithic application with a heavy siloing between development and operations, and which led to a lot of really painful deployments. We think that if they start to own their applications more, it'll speed up that time to deliver, and overall everybody will be, happy, productive members of society. Since we were already kind of looking at Helion OpenStack for, enabling cloud-native architectures within the enterprise, the Helion development platform as the PaaS on top of it, kind of made a lot of sense to us. So there's really kind of 2 groups you got to get on board here. One is executive support, and the other is the developers. As far as getting the executives on board, kind of talking points to sell to them. Hey, happy developers are productive developers, and this is kind of something cool to do for a couple days. All the kind of pizza and Red Bull you can consume. You are empowering your developers to own their own operations. You can get them exposure to modern application frameworks, leading to kind of less technical debt, which for a developer who's stuck in a day job maintaining a large enterprise application, they need that kind of break to go explore something new. They may come up with a novel solution to some existing problem you're having, just by being able to take a little bit of time back and go kind of play for a little while. It's a great team building event, especially if you have a really large organization, with a lot of different silos, distributed teams, stuff like that. So we had people coming in from New York. We had people from, I think, 4 or 5 different lines of business coming together. Learning some of the challenges that each of them is facing, and seeing where there's common ground there. The other thing to keep in mind is that timing is really important here. We unfortunately chose a time that was about 2 weeks after the Vancouver Summit and about a week after HP Discover, so it was kind of hard to get marketing resources during that time.
So another important thing to do is once you've got the buy-in from your sponsors, is setting some of the expectations for the developers. The most important thing is that they need to be prepared when they arrive. Typically, that means bringing a laptop with their favorite languages and IDEs installed. That's not a problem. But we also are suggesting that they spend a little bit of time getting familiar with the platform as a service that we're doing. In this case, it was Cloud Foundry. Even though the developers may not do it, we do strongly encourage doing some of the homework of pulling down the sample applications, taking a look at some of the build packs and how the development process is actually done. That's not always the case, but that's why we have some folks walking around, talking to the individual teams and seeing if there's any issues. Got a question?
Yeah, so was this your idea that you were saying, hey, like a cool idea of a hackathon, or was this something that HP brought to you and say, we do something else? How did it all come about?
We were discussing the problem we were having, getting traction with HP. HP suggested, hey, let's try a hackathon.
Traction in the way that your developers were struggling with some stuff, or?
Yeah, so, trying to get them exposure to sort of some of these concepts and models when they're fully consumed with a day job. So it was kind of a, let's take a few days out, get them out, for a few days of that world, so they can go explore.
What's the difference between this like in a workshop? What's the other thing that like you go to a hackathon versus to a company? A workshop can be the same thing, right? Or is it the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, a hackathon is typically a really intense time getting a number of teams, number of developers together, working on some brand new idea, right? So the focus isn't so much providing training to them. I mean, obviously you need to give a little bit, but it's more giving them the time and providing the help so they can actually try this themselves, write some code, run into issues, and have somebody who can help them out quickly.
I would say there's definitely elements of both. I would say workshop is a bit more guided in terms of what the expected outcome would be. If I'm going to a workshop for 3 days, I'm going to come out with very specific skills around some technology, and I'm going to be able to, be a little more operational, I would say. A hackathon, after the initial training day, was very, broadly focused. We had teams, developing on in various languages, various stacks, working on their own app ideas, really. So at the core of it, yes, there was a common foundation of that platform, but it's the hackathon is very much come with an idea, and we're going to judge you based on kind of the merits of that idea as well as your execution, in basically 2 days of hacking.
In your case, is it you would open to the developers, or did you kind of guide them, say we've been having some issues with XYZ applications?
So we had a big challenge there. We went back and forth on that question actually quite a few times, where we were struggling. So we're at the parent company level of all of these different lines of business organizations. So we were struggling to find sort of a common overarching theme of problem to solve for this hackathon. I think that other organizations that may be, a little less distributed or a little less siloed, can absolutely come in and go, hey, we're having, problems around, managing HR stuff. Let's see what we can do around that, get some ideas out of that, and, eventually move some of those things in production. What we kind of landed on was, hey, let's, come up with some sample application ideas to get them thinking, but they definitely can go off script here and do their own thing if they'd like. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I think what made it more important is actually what a hackathon is, and from a
Sure. So for example, typically, the call, a lot of these hackathons are public, and it's centered around technologies. I was involved one at HP Big Data a couple of weeks ago, and they offered different prizes depending if what technology you used. Right. In the case with Fox, it's using HTTP. Big Data, we had different products to use. The idea is bring the developers in and let them come up with any idea, anything at all that leverage some of that technology. So in the example with Fox, we had someone who was interested in improving some business processes having to do with software acquisition. Right? She had a couple ideas. She wanted to flesh this out, had a use case of, this is what the application would look like, this is what the value would be. There were other folks that were a little bit more specific to their particular business of what they do in their normal day job, and they kind of used it as an excuse, a couple of days to sit down, hash out some ideas. For hackathons in general, random ideas. You go all out for a couple of days. At the end of this, there'll be some kind of judging. There'll be a presentation, 2 to 3 minute presentation. Judging criteria kind of depends on who the sponsor is. Right. In the Fox case, we had like 95% of the votes were from the sponsoring executives. HP had a little bit of input, and did you use the technology, and did you make some progress there? So the developers, they get out some kind of prize. It can be small, it can be a little bit larger. Get bragging rights, that sort of thing. Right. So that's sort of the high level view. Is that a fair assessment?
So basically, in the that like today, so developers from ground up have to build this product that is developed,
Right.
and you use the technology that they're supposed to be using, or
Right.
or planning for using the technology that you expect to be milestones.
Right.
Right. So the overall kind of way it works is you come in, you hack for a couple days. At the end of the hackathon, you demo your application to a panel of judges. The judges award prizes based on whatever criteria. And yeah, it's basically it can be a social event, and
They all have that idea stage view.
depends on the hackathon.
Exactly.
For our internal hackathon, absolutely, yeah. That's basically work product.
Right, but for more of the public ones, there's a strong suggestion to perhaps open source your idea, make it publicly available, put it in your
Right.
Git repo. But it kind of depends on who's sponsoring a hackathon, how public it is, or not.
And what the overall goal is. If it's more of a marketing event for a company that has a service or an API that they're trying to get more developers exposed to, big prizes, come in, develop against this stuff, and hopefully you like it and go start to use it and start paying us. There's also things like, bug squashing hackathons and stuff like that, where it's, hey, here's our list of outstanding bugs, let's go through and, squash as many of these as we can, type thing, in which case, those would typically be worked on open source projects anyway, so it's all reverting back to the community.
So sort of getting back to setting expectations for the developers. The other key thing is that it's expected that you write new code, right? You can't bring a partially developed product with you. Obviously, you can use libraries, but make sure you use libraries that everyone else has access to, right? Keep a fair playing field. The other thing is yes, you're supposed to develop something that can actually run at the end of this, something somewhat demoable, but this is not a final product, right? This is really more of a proof of concept, a little bit more than a mock-up, right? There should be actually stuff moving, underneath the covers, but put the full nav bar there, but only this one thing really works, right? Because you should come up with a particular use case of what your app is trying to do, and get that working. Try to get it from end to end. And as you're developing this, keep an eye on what the judges are going to be looking at, right? A lot of the times these are not, they're not going to be picking apart your code. It's more of what your idea of your application can do, right? For example, there was one at Fox where the idea was interesting. The implementation didn't look really sexy, right? But the idea, right, is licensing. But the idea was, oh, this is a neat idea. Later, we'll bring the UX people on and make this look all pretty. But it was really proof of concept for the idea.
That said, all the pretty apps won.
That's always the way.
Yeah, that's kind of true. Sorry, I skipped ahead here a bit. Damn it. Hit the wrong key. So again, yeah, this is really just a mock-up. You try to get a working thing. The other important thing is the developers are divided up into teams. Typically, they're self-selecting, but if you're in a corporate environment, maybe you want to put your teams together before you arrive, right? Maybe encourage some team building.
Yeah, this is another thing we kind of went back and forth on was, basically predefining teams versus hoping teams would organically form, kind of at the event, and how much time that would take and things like that.
Yeah, and typically in public hackathons, it's self-selecting because you may or may not come with other folks. Obviously, corporate is a little bit different. In terms of support, you'll have if you're hosting the hack, you're going to have some support staff, people that are familiar with the technology, know how to do development in the technology areas. And the way that support is done is typically they're just walking around all day, going to each team, seeing if they're making progress, seeing if they're having any issues, making suggestions as they go. So a lot of it is informal, hands-on training as people are walking around. So essentially, get them unblocked as quick as possible. One of the other things that we try to focus on is if it takes more than like 5 minutes to resolve a particular problem, see if you can work around it. Right. This is more of a prototype, proof of concept. Get something working. You can always clean it up later. We had an example. There was a developer who wanted to use Node.js, which is great. But he also wanted to use a tool that wasn't fully supported by the build packs, the grunt. So it was a little bit out of the mainstream. Certainly something that you can get working, but not in the time constraints of a hackathon.
Can you give an idea of how many people, developers we had at this one particular one? Well, what was the support? Oh, you have it right
Yeah,
here.
we
Oh, yeah.
we have some slides here. Actually, a little bit farther on, we talk about what type of people and what the breakdown is. That's primary. So, are folks familiar with the term cloud native applications? I mean, there was a lot of talk in the earlier ones. Do you not? Does anyone not have a high level view of what a cloud native app is? Primarily stateless. All your configuration data is in the environment, not in your app. You're using other backing store of data, using databases, Redis, MongoDB, nothing that's actually in the application. Everything is external. That allows you to do scale out very easily in a platform environment, and it also leads into the whole DevOps area. I don't know if you want to comment.
That pretty much said it.
Yeah, it depends on if you understand what that is. So preparing for a hackathon, right? Let's talk about how to organize it, what the homework kind of looks like for the developers, what kind of environment, and what we can do afterwards to keep this going. So the most important thing is you have to provide some kind of nice development environment for the developers. In our case, we're using the Helion development platform, which includes Cloud Foundry. So I put together a nice, reasonable-sized Cloud Foundry environment. Now, how do you build one of those things, right? You need to know about how many people. In our case, I think we had around 40 or so developers show up.
We had about 50 signed up when we dropped to about 35 day of.
Right. So that's important. If you're the folks that are going to be building out the environment where yours is working, you need to know about how many. You also need to know what kind of technology stacks they're using, especially if you're in Cloud Foundry, because you have a lot of Linux-focused droplet execution environments, and then you have .NET support as well. So you have to make sure, depending on what your split of your developers are, that you're properly sized the environment. Again, this is something that you would poll your developers before they arrive. Additionally, what kind of data services do you want to provide? Our implementation of Cloud Foundry It includes databases, Redis, Mongo, message queues, file systems, all that stuff. For a hackathon, you probably want to provide all those data services, right? Just to give your developers an opportunity to play with these things. But the caution is, you may not be ready to support those in production, right? So there's a little bit of caution there. Certainly encourage your developers to try use these things, but keep in the back of your head, maybe we're not quite ready to go in production for, say, Mongo or some of these other newer technologies. Other things that you need to do to prep your environment. Obviously, you need to create the accounts and have the credentials available for your developers, right? This is all authenticated. Quotas are also another important thing, right? You don't want to overcommit your environment. So the rule of thumb we were using for this particular environment is give each developer about 1 gigabyte worth of memory. And that is typically about one Java, reasonable sized Java application or a .NET application. If you're using PHP, Node, you can have more instances. But the idea is we wanted to give enough quota to everyone, but not overcommit the environment. Sort of the follow-on of that is be flexible as well. We'll talk about what kind of staffers to bring, but have someone on hand who can change the quota, give people a little bit more quota if they need it, or those sort of things. So some of this is just being agile in your environment of what you're providing to the developers. The other thing to keep in mind is in more of a corporate hackathon environment, depending on where your cluster is, where your development environment is, you may or may not have full access to all the other data services in your environment. For example, any of the file shares, your corporate data, right? You can't go back to the financial stuff. You can't go back to the movie databases, right? This particular environment was in a little bit more walled off environment. Part of that is that when we're quickly developing these apps here, security is not always the highest concern here. So you may want to put this outside the normal corporate firewall. That said, you may want to encourage your customers or your developers, or provide as one of the sponsors a cut of the data, so at least your developers would have access to something closer to what they would have in a production
Some sample
environment.
data set, maybe from Dev or QA or something.
Yeah, movie titles, that sort of thing. So at this point, I give a little bit of a commercial. I wanted to talk a little bit of what the Helion development platform. I mentioned previously it's based on Cloud Foundry, but I also wanted to show where it fit into the OpenStack environment. So down here is what HP's product is called the Helion OpenStack environment. That's essentially OpenStack that we've productized, support, all those sort of things. All the stuff that you're familiar with, Nova, Cinder, all that good stuff. The Helion development platform sits on top of that environment. So it's an in-cloud workload. It has a number of different components within this development environment. The primary one we have over here is what we call the Application Lifecycle Services, ALS, which is an implementation of Cloud Foundry, which allows for it's a polyglot language, a polyglot PaaS service allows you to develop stateless applications. It supports Python, Ruby, Node.js, .NET, Java, a number of other ones. It also provides a number of different services within that. For example, MongoDB, Redis, Memcache, those sort of data services. Another part of the Helion development platform is some other OpenStack technologies. Specifically, we have Trove for the database. We have also support for messaging, identification, and other services. So Helion development platform is Cloud Foundry, plus a number of OpenStack technologies that are not part of the base OpenStack offering. As well as we have a marketplace that allows you to bring in and install things like Vertica and other emerging things to help build out the ecosystem. So it's sort of a commercial I wanted to kind of drop in here, but this is what we ran the hackathon on. developer laptop. All right, so when these developers show up at your hackathon, what should they be bringing with them? Right, we'll talk about the physical plant next, but what are they showing up with? Obviously, they should be bringing their laptops. Typically, they already have their languages, their compilers, interpreters, all that stuff installed. That's fine. What they typically don't have installed is the Cloud Foundry CLI tools. Right, so I have a link for that. In this particular environment, you can use the Helion command line tool, or you can use the Cloud Foundry tool. It essentially lets you upload into Cloud Foundry the same way. It's available on Linux, Macs, and Windows, so it supports all the developers that you, depending on what you come with. The other thing that we suggest that they install, again, depending on their languages, is we have some integration, some plugins to IDEs such as Eclipse. We have one that helps with Java development, and we also have a very nice one that plugs into Visual Studio for .NET development. So again, these are things that developers can either do before they show up or do it when they arrive on site. It's a very quick process, but it helps move things along. So there are a class of tools that I hit the wrong buttons again. There's a class of tools that they probably don't have installed, which would be useful. Jeez, I apologize. I'll just leave it here. And that is to install some of the data services. For example, if they're going to use MySQL, Postgres, those sort of the list over there, recommend having them install it on their laptop before they arrive. What that allows them to do is do some quick testing on their laptops, make sure it sort of all works before they push it into the Cloud Foundry environment and leverage the services that are in the environment. So that's sort of one area that could take a little bit of time to download and get running.
So as far as the physical environment goes, before people get there, make sure your stuff works. Make sure the network is working. Hugely important. Make sure you have enough power. Everybody's going to have a laptop. Most people are going to have a phone, tablets, whatever. Power everywhere. Test that both the environment and your development environment and the internet are both accessible and responsive. Push a sample application to it. Make sure you can scale it, stuff like that. Set up plan to have a space for each team to collaborate in. Give them a whiteboard, give them Post-its. Have power there again. So in our case, since we did a training day before the actual hackathon began, we had a classroom set up kind of like this the first day, and then we actually transitioned that to more of a group setting, overnight between the two kind of segments. Have lots of caffeine, snacks, water, candy around, things developers like to eat. Also, things like Advil, Claritin, eye drops, tissues. Don't forget that stuff. things that make people feel human after 2 days of hacking. So I would strongly recommend having some sort of on-site social function, like an open bar. Get people kind of mingling, talking about things, socializing. Could help with team formation type stuff for more of the kind of introverted people. And prizes. So is it worth playing for? Have some sort of awesome tier of prizes that will, really get them motivated beyond, oh, hey, I learned a new thing, and I got this cool new tablet type stuff. We ran into, make your prizes so that you can be flexible with them, so that you can easily split them up, say. So, for example, if you have a very large team that wins a prize, that's a lot of prizes to give away. If you have a very small team that wins a prize, they were tablets, some Bose headphones, and some Intel Edison Galileo kits, which are kind of a Raspberry Pi for wearables.
Yeah, they're cool.
Wi-Fi works great, but once there are 200, 300 people in the room, I just want to have a laptop and phone and then Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
It's actually runs out of connectivity.
Yeah, we had, I think, 4 or 5 access points set up around the room. Also, if you're doing this kind of off-site, set up some kind of site-to-site VPN, so not everybody's on a client VPN, trying to get back into your environment. We actually used our access points, actually just automatically put them onto our corporate network. It was pretty awesome. Staffing needs, as we promised. So we had, kind of one developer staffer for every 2 to 4 teams, walking around and helping out. Hey, are you stuck? What's going on? Checking in with, where are you at with the app, stuff like that. We had check-ins every couple hours of, hey, who's stuck, who needs help, how's it going? They should definitely be well-versed in whatever your common stacks are. For us, that was .NET and Java. But be able to point developers in the right direction if they're going kind of off the reservation and, oh, hey, I want to do, Mongo and Node. You're going, what? So, yeah, the biggest issue we actually ran into was scope creep. So these developers have 2 days to build something, and they're trying to reinvent YouTube, or LinkedIn, or Facebook, or something like that. We're going, no, keep it like this. Figure out what you can do in 2 days. So that was definitely key. The other thing you want to have is some sort of administrator for the platform itself. Quotas are going to need to get rearranged. Team members are going to need to get shifted into different teams, project spaces, stuff like that. So having somebody around that can handle that stuff and help debug the actual platform is great. That one's you.
Yeah, basically keep in mind that the point of the hackathon is not to have a finished product at the end of the day. The idea is learn some stuff, figure out what works, what doesn't work. It's the journey, not the destination.
So, post hackathon, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Try and keep the environment up. Try and have something customer facing already built, so that they can continue to use the stuff beyond just the 2 days. Otherwise, they're going to go back to their day jobs and be like, oh, hey, that was a fun 2 days, and I forgot everything. So your biggest challenge is definitely going to be impacting their day-to-day job. Hopefully you can get them to, a little more of a grassroots movement up to their management to say, hey, for this next app we're going to build, I think we should really go in this direction. We could deploy easily, and it was great. At the same time, you need to market what you've done. You need to get the word out about what you've done. Sell it to your executive management. Get them on board for the next one. Figure out what the cadence is, that you want to have. Do you want to have these every 6 months? Do you want to do them annually? Stuff like that. Have a postmortem. Discuss what worked, what didn't work, what can you do better next time. Did the sponsors see value? Did the developers see value? What did they say about it? What did they like? Excuse me. What technologies were used that seemed to be more successful? That's going to start to inform what services you need to bring in and start looking at supporting in production later on. Put together some materials to show off to the executives. If you can, get some video of people working together, collaborating, stock footage type stuff. Shows everybody having a great time and being super productive. You need to strike while the iron is hot before, the next fire to put out takes focus off of what you've done. And
in your case, how would you rate it? Particular case, how you did a hackathon and went well. What are some of the highlights? You bragged to management, say, hey, look.
So, yeah, that was mostly around feedback that we got. I would say, as well as the developers all, pretty much everybody got something deployed. which I think was a big win. They had 2 days to do it, but we had people, we had a single developer team that in 2 days, got up an actual working prototype of their application, which was pretty awesome. We had other larger teams that, started with the core of an idea, finished that really fast, and then moved on to start adding in additional features into their work. So a lot of that was, mostly hypothetical because we didn't necessarily follow our own advice there. But for the next one, we're totally going to.
So we have some lessons learned as well, right? Kind of random. We can riff on this. But,
Yeah.
The one thing that I thought was important is have name tags. Maybe have Mark and I'm a Node developer. I'm Devon. I do UX or whatever.
Yes, we had a lot of developers coming in from a lot of different organizations who just didn't know each other.
Yeah.
I didn't know a lot of the people there. And so having a way to identify who you are and what you do was kind of key. I would also say, we got very, very focused on getting the developers in there. If you're looking to, actually have people build something that's demoable and, want to win this thing, you're going to need to bring in more than just developers. You're going to need some, you're probably going to need a little bit of project management. You're going to need some UX, UI design, make it look pretty, stuff like that. So, maybe bringing in fully formed teams, from a single manager would be, I think, probably pretty ideal. People that have worked together before.
Other things around the social is consider putting together a list of bios, right? In addition to the name tags, a bio with a face, right? I'm horrible with faces and names, so if I have a list that I can study beforehand, that goes a long way to sort of breaking the ice and bringing maybe some of the more introverted folks out. Also, the social evening event, right? It's important to have it on site, right? Right offside from where they're doing their development. Maybe with some social lubrication, but at least, some non-alcoholic drinks and some snacks and stuff, just to get people mingling and talking about their experience.
I would say started a little bit early. We started ours kind of when the normal workday ends, so a lot of people were like, "Yeah, I'm out." So start it an hour and a half, an hour before that kind of happens to give people a chance to stick around.
I was going to ask about that logistical issue. I mean, oftentimes people just got to commute somewhere. They got to kiss
right.
and all that kind of stuff. And so, did you find it worked better if you take them all away for 2 days, or did you just let them?
We actually did it next door to the Fox lot, so everybody could park where they normally parked, and then it was just a quick walk. I would definitely do it somewhere close to where they're already going anyway, so that they know kind of that commute. We had quite a few people actually stick around for the catered dinners and stuff like that. Yeah. So I would say it was pretty successful in that respect. But a lot of people were like, "Hey, I got a van pool to catch, so I can't stay much past 5 or whatever." We had people staying till midnight, 10 o'clock. Yeah.
Usually, if you're hacking on something, you really got your head in it.
Right.
But at the same time, it's
At the same time, it's a for our internal corporate thing, it's a work thing. And so if they're having fun, and the key is to make it kind of a fun environment, a fun thing to do, they're probably going to stay a little later. Also tee up with them ahead of time. Hey, you guys can stay late. That's totally encouraged. Definitely not mandatory, but encouraged. So make sure you let your significant other know, hey, I'm gonna be late. No, not really, honey. It's a hackathon, I swear.
And I think the other important thing is have your support staff that's coming perhaps from a vendor, staying at a hotel, so we're there all night anyway.
Right.
The hackathons are out there last minute. All but one of them started by the Friday about 6, 7 o'clock. Or Saturday morning. So some of them want them working Friday, so some Tuesday.
Yeah.
And all but two of them shut down about 11 o'clock at night. And they just go on out to 6 o'clock. So two of them had to share.
Yeah, we made the conscious decision to do it on a weekend because on a weekday actually, on weekdays to help encourage participation. Given that it was a work thing, we didn't want people to, we didn't want to take somebody's weekend away. The other thing that we kind of wrestled with was sort of pre-event organization and introductions to the teams. There are tools out there like hackathon.io and things like that that help organize hackathons and help organize development teams into teams around application ideas and stuff like that. So you can go in, you can write your bio, put in what your expertise is, and start to connect with other people in the hackathon beforehand. Most of those seem to center around public hackathons. There was no real way to do a private hackathon in there where you're just not inviting the public. So maybe one of the things we do the next time is have a hackathon around making a hackathon tool.
And from the support staff, some other things is that we used Slack, or you could use HipChat or other things.
Mm-hmm.
So we, the HP staff, were chatting among ourselves as well, right? So sharing some of our knowledge. We were also able to reach back to other resources in the company if we had some really challenging issues. The advantage of using Slack is we also invited some of the team members actually to come take a look, right? So we could bring people together sort of in an ad hoc manner and get some things resolved.
And that was also great for sharing, lessons that the individual app teams were learning along the way with each other as well.
And how did the developers think that HP was there? Like, oh, there's a vendor maybe with some like propaganda, or was there a little bit of that, or they took you with open arms and say, hey, yeah.
I think because the technology that we were encouraging them to use is pretty much open source technologies, right? It's Cloud Foundry, right, underneath the table. So yes, it's our product, but it's also something that's readily transferable to other Cloud Foundry implementations, right? So I don't think the developers saw that as, this is an HP only thing. They got value in general.
Yeah, I definitely didn't hear any backlash around it being too vendor centric.
Yeah. And the other thing is that the training was about a half day. And some of that was a little bit of a commercial sort of level setting of what it looked like. But more of that was how to use the tool, how to use Cloud Foundry. So again, it was vendor neutral as well.
How were the developers selected? Were they self-selected or?
No, so we begged, borrowed, pleaded from the development managers to send us developers. So it was they were really kind of selected by, kind of at the VP level. Hey, give us a list of people that you'll have attend this. And some of them got caught up in production issues and stuff like that. But for the most part, attendance was pretty good. So it was kind of. Okay. It was. They came in without necessarily preformed teams, and then we saw a lot of teams form along kind of the silo lines. As well as some other teams that were, a collaboration between, people who had never met that were from different organizations. There were just, one or two of those, and so they'd get together into a team. We also, went back and forth a lot on how to handle signups and marketing and stuff like that. And ultimately, we ended up, doing more of a top-down approach to it.
And finally, we have the 2-minute warning. Just some references here, right? We can make the slides available. I wanted to do a shout out to 12factor.net, learn a little bit more about what a cloud native application looks like. Some links to some of our tools. The last two, you may want to take a look at hackathon.popsinc.com. That's where the external marketing for the POPS Hackathon was done. And sort of as a comparison, there's an HP Hack Day, which was a one-day, one at a particular conference, just to give you a little feel from an internal versus an external approach.
You mentioned that you have to go to the VPs or their managers and get back to make sure we have developers. Now that they've come back, have you touched base with those management teams, say how they go, or maybe could feedback?
We actually had.
Easier next time when you look for
We actually had a lot of those managers come in and be the judges, and their feedback on kind of what they saw come out of it was very positive.
And that's it.